And furthermore, also, could one of you, whoever feel that you know more of the case, tell us more also about what the other side, so to speak, says? Because not now, first of all, the claim is from Cuba. There's a report which is uncontested. But how about the U.S.? I mean, in terms of the danger in Miami or in Cuba towards one another. For instance, how about the U.S. military? How do they train?
Well, you know, the Americans are very hypocritical people. For long periods of time and during most periods of time, they have tried to stop Cuban refugees from reaching the United States. So it's, most of the activities of the Coast Guard, for instance, is not in reality to help people who are trying for some reason to leave Cuba and come to America. They intercept them and then they put them somewhere else. They don't, and they've even sent people back to Cuba. So I mean, the main effort is to keep Cuban people, just like they're trying to keep everyone else out of the country, Haitians and so on, from getting to the United States. On the other hand, they have allowed counter-revolutionary exile groups, from Cuban exile groups, to use American territory to stage incidents, attacks, whatever you want to call it. I mean, many times these people were only, in fact, sent as dropping leaflets or something, but nevertheless, I mean, they're making an illegal incurrence into Cuban airspace, and you never know if they're going to drop a bomb instead or what they're going to do. They have no permission to be flying in Cuban airspace. You know, if an airplane flies into American airspace and it doesn't immediately do what the Americans tell it to do, they would shoot it down. They shoot it down. That's normal procedure, especially nowadays when they're so afraid of terrorist attack. So they're denying, what they're in a sense doing is denying the Cubans the right to do the same thing that they normally would do in the United States. If a small plane came in over the coast of Florida and had not identified itself in advance and asked for permission to enter American airspace, they would send up a jet and shoot it down. That's the end. So it's a very strange world we're living in. I mean, it's completely hypocritical. They are allowing, I mean, I grew up, let me tell you, I grew up, the kids who were going to school with me were then training out in the Everglades because they then went to the Bay of Pigs. I mean, and they were trained in Miami. I saw them myself, there's no doubt. But of course that was early, that was in the 60s. But I have no doubt whatsoever that these people are still there and still doing the same thing.
And the Bay of Pigs, of course, is the invasion of Cuba, which was directed by the CIA. And also there are reports that also claim that, or that verify that the US military themselves, that they actually, during their mock training, what they do is they pretend that they will, I mean, in terms of the situation in the Florida Strait, that they pretend to stop the Cubans from Miami to come into Cuba with small boats and weapons, rather than stopping Cubans coming from Cuba into Miami. So the threat, the direction of the threat is from Miami towards Cuba rather than the opposite. And let's also just clarify the word conspiracy. What does that mean? When someone is charged to commit conspiracy to commit espionage, what does that mean?
It must mean something very concrete, that you have done something concrete to plan and prepare for the carrying out of a certain activity. So if you are conspiring to spy, then you must be able to prove with whom are you conspiring about, what have you discussed, what have you decided, or what have you done. So if they American government at one point claimed that the Cuban Five had some secret American documents, and then that disappeared because they could never find them. There weren't any. They had none. But I mean, that would have been conspiracy, or at least if they could prove that they were trying to break into some place where there was some secret document, but they were never able to do that. It's a very vague charge, and normally even conspiracy, or we say in Swedish, förberedelse, to prepare for a crime, then it must be concrete. And there must be evidence to show that it happened and what happened. And there must be intent. It's not enough even what you do. You have to be able to show that the person intended to do something specific. And they were not able to do that either, in my opinion. The only thing that they could prove is what these five actually admitted themselves, that they were, in fact, infiltrating the counter-revolutionary exile groups in Miami to get information about their plans about attacking, terrorist attacks on Cuba. That's what they were doing.
But still, nevertheless, the actual charge of conspiracy to commit espionage does not imply that you are in a country spying generally. It does imply that you are attaining some information that would be a threat to the country. Is that correct?
Espionage has to be against the state in question. And spying on groups which are not part of the state, although they may be very heavily financed by the CIA, at one point they certainly were, they're still not part of the state. So spying on them does not fulfill the definition of espionage, which has to be pointed at the United States as a country or as a government and state. So that's why I say it has never been proved, because there was nothing to indicate that even the guy who worked at this naval base, he was just a normal worker there. There was no evidence that he had access to any information other than the fact that he might be able to see if they suddenly landed an extra 50 airplanes at that base, and he might wonder why or something, and he might give that information. But I mean, it wasn't as if he had access to any documents, communications, or that he tried to gain access to any information, documents or communication, which would be the normal way to carry out espionage.
But still, they did get convicted for these charges, and perhaps also that has something to do with the composition of those living in Miami. I was thinking to ask you, Irma, could you tell us something about the composition of those living in Miami?
You mean the jury or the people that live in Miami?
No, the people who live in Miami.
Yes.
In general.
Well, the people that when I lived in Miami, I was 12 years old, and I went back to Cuba when I was 16, and because I met again with my father after 6 years that he had left Cuba. I had to go with him through certain meetings and activities of these organizations, Brothers to the Rescue, so they're called Alpha 66, and so on. And these people are very influent and very rich, and they have these groups in Miami, and they have control over some media like channels 23 and 41, 51, which are the Spanish channels there in the media in Miami, and which most of the population looks at, because there are many people who comes from Latin America in Miami. But there are also in the United States, in Miami, and now many Cubans that have left Cuba because of any economic problems, because of their family being in Miami, or as an immigration in any part of the world, and they are very much they have joined the case of the Cuban Five, and they are more in numbers than those who are part of these organizations, and they have voted for Obama because he had promised to change the relationship towards Cuba. They have supported the case of the Five, and just recently they even put a poster in the old Havana, where a lot of Cubans live, supporting the case of the Five, and even though it was paid to be there for a month, they had to bring it down after 2 days, because these organizations, they protest, and they were very, very upset, and and so they have to put it down. So as you see in Miami, although these organizations have a lot of control, a lot of influence, there are also people that are supportive of Cuba, and also people from the rest of Latin America.
Kenneth, you both lived in Miami. You said you also protested there, and you just mentioned how it was protest there, and there was a risk of actually being killed. Could you also perhaps give us, well, I'm trying to talk about Irma González. Could you just tell us shortly about the case?
Well, it's interesting also because that particular case was actually taking place at the same time as the preparation for the trial and the beginning of the trial. And this is the case of a little boy who came to Miami in a boat or a raft, and I think his mother died. It was his mother he traveled with. But the mother actually didn't have the father's permission to take this child to Miami, and the father then, through international contacts, got a lawyer in Miami who asked that his child, his son, be returned. And for once, the United States actually did the right thing. I mean, they followed the law, and this father had the right to, the son had the right to be reunited with his father. We would have done exactly the same thing if the case had come up in Sweden, for instance. And fine. But this was not fine for these exile organizations. I mean, they could not even understand the question of the relationship of a family, a father and a son, instead of just some cousin or uncle or something like that who this child didn't even know. They protested that it would be such a terrible crime to send this child back to his father because his father was living in Cuba. So I mean, these people, they define the world only from this point of view of their hatred of the present regime in Cuba. So they couldn't even understand or sympathize with the fate of this child or respect American law, which is the same. I mean, it's international law. It's basically the same in every country. And these people were violent. There were fights. They attacked the police and federal agents when they were taking this boy. There are films, I mean, literally attacks, and there were bomb threats. There were all kinds of, I would say, terrorist activities in connection with this. And this all got carried together with the case of the Cuban Five because they were actually taking place at the same time. And so the same people who were demonstrating about this boy were also demonstrating against that the Five should be more or less hung directly. I mean, why they should even be given a trial, I don't know. But this is the atmosphere, and if you haven't seen it, you can't imagine it.